Hi, welcome to The Upside. I'm your host, Paul Santinello. Today, my guest is Select Board member Mark Gold. Mark, thanks for coming.
My pleasure. Thanks for having me, Paul.
I don't know if you'll say thank you after this, but we'll see what happens. I asked Mark to come in today to talk about some issues. About 3 weeks ago, we did another show with Richard Foster talking about some capital issues, things like that. But I'm going to get into some deeper issues with Mark today. My favorite one, but I'm going to talk about budget, capital projects, and part of the reason why I'm doing this, Mark, is not so much to I know I can say this on TV, but we're not trying to set up the bitch line, so to speak, but to start to talk to people about what's really going on in town, because we have a lot of big projects that are still in front of us, and we're going to be asked to make snap decisions on certain things like a new school, and that's not to be offensive to anybody who's involved in the project. But there's always that next thing of what's plan B if that does go through, for example. So those are the kind of things I want to talk about today. So one of the things I want to talk about is it's September, and I'm still running over potholes, right? Mm-hmm. At what point in time, and I know you can't answer this because you're not involved in the operations of DPW, but I'm sure it must come up at a select board meeting here or there. At what point in time do we anticipate fixing potholes? Now, growing up in New England, we all know that if there's not a pothole, there's something wrong, right? But we're in a process of it's September now. The time has been long gone since we've had the opportunity to repair them.
Right. The issue has been staffing at the DPW. It's been that way for almost since COVID, but certainly probably the last year and a half. And the good news is at this September 3rd Select Board meeting, which was just the other day for us, the town approved and the union approved a revised pay schedule. We have every hope, and it is just a hope, there's no guarantee, that this revised pay schedule will allow us to attract the people we need to bring the DPW much closer to its full staffing level. Frankly, and I'm don't want to speak for the DPW, but at the staffing level they have, there's a lot of triage going on, and I won't say they're only responding to emergencies, but they respond to emergencies and they have a long backlist of other projects. So the hope is that over the next 2 weeks to 4 weeks we'll start bringing people in, and after that, hopefully before it gets too cold and the Amosite, factories shut down, we'll start being able to repair the potholes. But if people have particular potholes, particular size, or particular area with a lot of potholes, I really urge people to call the DPW, because we do have enough people to handle what really needs to be done. It's just being done on a triage basis. So call and squeaky wheels often get the grease.
Okay. All right. I know it's not my favorite thing to hear, but I understand what you're saying. But in the Maytown meeting, what was the number of the budget passed?
I think it was $62 or $63 million.
Okay, because I thought online I saw 82, and I thought that number was was that total spend with
I think
enterprise funds and stuff?
I think that's a little high.
Okay, because I also thought 72 was a number.
Okay, well, I may be wrong, Paul. I thought it was in the 60s.
All right, so with that said, though, Mark's background, and why I asked Mark to be here, is Mark's background prior to being on the select board, and we served together, so I know where Mark came from, but he was also part of capital planning. And capital planning is the committee in town where through the charter, where all projects of a certain dollar amount or a certain length of time that they will exist would go through capital plan and be vetted and then positioned to the select board to approve or not approve those various projects. And I don't know what the parameters are today, but it used to be, $25,000 or more for 10 years or longer, something like that. Like a fire engine, a big fire engine purchase, right. We would plan that out and put money away every year and so forth. Are we still going through that kind of process, or is it more just being through the town manager, would you say?
We are going through a capital planning process. I will be frank and tell you, Paul, the capital planning process doesn't work great. One of the big things that happened is when we switched our town government, which was about 15 years ago, and we went to a strong town manager, we switched the way the capital process is managed. Used to be, years ago, all the department heads and all the different groups would submit to the capital planning committee, who would do the prioritization and the sorting. You know, when we got a town manager, they now go through the town manager. So the question is, you know, how much does the capital planning committee really add to the process? And frankly, my opinion is the town manager does a great job of prioritizing within the town. And what the capital planning committee does, and I think should do, is bring the perspective of the voters and the residents to it. But having said that, the process is still not working really well. And I've proposed to the town manager, and we're working on it with some lower priority, but with a priority of revising the capital planning process. Because frankly, the flow of project proposals from, you know, departments to the town manager, to the capital planning committee, back to the select board, to the finance committee, you know, isn't working really well, especially now when you add in things like, we have a building committee who wants to weigh in on roofs and, you know, other things that have to do with buildings. And we have some other committees that need to weigh in. And of course, then we have the Community Preservation Committee, who often gets capital projects that can be funded through community preservation. So the answer is, yes, we have a process, Paul. It's not working really, really well. We think, and I know the town manager agrees with me, we've talked about it, have sketched out a revised process that we think will work better. And my hope is that we get to implement it pretty soon, because as things sit now, we're wasting the time, frankly, of the capital planning committee, and we shouldn't do that.
Okay. And one of the things, you know, you mentioned a building committee, and I know over time, a lot of times things are designed as a reaction to something, whatever that is. And I think the building committee at one point was a reaction to buildings maybe not being taken care of and so forth. But when you start having farming out, so I haven't, you know, I'm a believer that town meeting is not the right form of government for a business that's paying 60, 70 million bucks a year to operate, because you guys can go through a whole capital planning process, and I've seen it happen where the town manager goes through it, capital planning goes through it, lays it all out for a period of something over 3 years, and it gets blown up at town meeting, and you're back to the drawing board. So something that could have been 2 or 3 years to work on just to develop to get to town meeting gets thrown out at town meeting because someone raised a point that maybe knew or didn't know what they were talking about, and it gets shot down. But when you take a look at, I think the town has, we have 6 schools, we have, I think, another 10 buildings, maybe, like facilities to take care of in town. They're under the realm of the DPW, those buildings, in terms of facilities, maintenance, and things like that. Does the select board ever have a discussion about what committees are still working or not working? Because you talk about, you know, streamlining the process, but the more committees that are involved in something, a capital project, the less that project's probably going to go through the way it was intended to.
We haven't done that in a while, and it's time to do that. I'm hoping that at our upcoming planning session, the select board will look at what committees are working, not working. I will say that a year or so ago, we recommended and town meeting approved some modifications to the charter that switched some of the committees, but frankly, that would have been a good time to eliminate them. But I think this whole capital planning process that I talked about earlier is a good opportunity to look at, you know, who does what and where. I mean, you're right. The permanent building committee was implemented as a really reaction. We were building a new adult senior center. We were building, you know, a couple other facilities, a DPW building. You know, at this point, you know, as you know, even if we build a middle school, that school building committee has nothing to do with our permanent building committee in town, because it's set by the state and the MSPA, the Mass School Building Committee, MSBA. So I think that it is ripe to take a look at it. We may have too many fingers in the pie, but yet we have some expertise that we really don't want to lose. And so we have to find a way to make sure we've got the right skills, but not so much administration and so much paperwork that we just kill the process.
You know, and that's a good point, because you want to utilize the resources you have in your community. but and I know that committees were formed or designed at certain points while I was on the board to deflect sometimes, that you take the pressure off the town manager, pressure off the select board, or you placate a group or whatever. Doesn't speak for all of them. I'm just saying in general. So you don't want to lose the talent that we have in town. On the other hand, is someone elected 5 people to run the town with the town manager, not no one elects a building committee type of thing, or whatever, capital planning committee, that type of thing. So hopefully, I'm glad you guys are at least talking about it, that there's something that can be done with it. So we talk about, you mentioned the schools. There's potentially going to be, most likely going to be a recommendation to vote to build to a new school, a new middle school. It looks like, and I mean, I'm taking things maybe out of context, that they're going to recommend one site, and it's going to be the Williams Middle School project, or at Williams Middle School. That's what it looks like.
It's more than just looks like. That was the most recent recommendation of the building committee.
So my question is, and I think what I would really love to see is, let's say that vote goes through. And I'm not opposed to that. I think that, our middle schools are beat up and they weren't designed great or whatever, but let's say it goes through. What's plan B, or part B, which is the other property? So just for people who maybe not familiar with this, but the MSBA, the Mass School Building Authority, authorized the town to replace Glenbrook Middle School. The town submitted a statement of interest for both Glenbrook and Williams Middle School, but the state looked and said, Glenbrook, my assumption is they looked and said, Glenbrook's a security risk. It's an open school. There's no security. We authorized the replacement of Glenbrook. Explain that. There's no walls.
The walls only go up 2/3 of the way, so you can't close a room. You can't isolate a room. That's right. I apologize.
No, that's okay. That's a good point.
So Glenbrook Middle School was accepted into the MSBA process for replacing the school. So we, the options, just so people know, we could replace Glenbrook and leave Williams. We could build one school and replace them all, or we could upgrade Glenbrook and we're on our own with Williams. And so this committee that's looking at it, and Armin Ray is the chair, has determined that the best approach, both for facilities, for cost, and for educational purposes, is to build one larger middle school. And I won't get into the educational justifications for it. I think Superintendent O'Shea's done a great job of doing that. And the site that's being recommended is the fields at Williams Middle School. What has not been discussed is what happens with Glenbrook when eventually there's one single middle school. And additionally, there's a property we call it the water tower property, which is under control of the school department, the school committee. At some point, one will hope that, and I say that because there's no action that I know of yet, but one will hope that the school committee will release those properties to the town for some kind of a process to outline and identify what should next be there. I think that the cost of the new school, which I've now heard is in the order of $132 million. I thought it was going to be 120, but now they're saying somewhere in 130. That much of that, or some of that, not much of it, but some of it could be offset by a development of one or both of the alternative properties, which would obviously follow the construction of a new middle school, but certainly would give people some financial backing that says, once we have this, we can do something with those properties, generate some revenue for the town, and use that revenue either as in a lump sum to pay down some of the bond, or somehow to get us additional income. But Plan B is nothing until we get through Plan A, and I think that school building committee is focusing pretty heavily on getting through Plan A, which is to get a site and a design recommended for a single middle school, and then get that through, which is expected to be a special town meeting next fall.
Okay. So from my perspective, This is why I would vote to support a new school, because I mean, I've been in both of those buildings, and Williams is an older school. I mean, it's functioning, but it's not.
1956.
Yeah, and I mean, but it is what it is, right? I mean, there's limitations of what you can do in certain things. You can upgrade it, but you're still limited by the frame of the building and so forth. The issue is that you're going to have a big piece of property, and my point of contention and bone of contention with this is that we built a new senior center, but left the old senior center. So it wasn't good enough to be a senior center any longer, and I'm not the guy who does programming up there, but I guess we do now better programming at the new senior center, because that was the reason of doing it. But we kept the building. Now, town government's going to move into that building, which is fine, but then that leaves us town hall. And it also leaves us Old Town Hall, right? So we seem to, we get the idea of building a new building, but as a town, we don't, because to me, to vote for the first project, you have to know what's going to go on with those other, the water tower property is one thing, and that land was set aside years ago for the potential of a school. Well, we don't need that school, obviously, right? I mean, because our population is where it is and so forth. But the Glenbrook property is such a big piece of property that I would hate to see it vacant for years before we decide what to do with it, or get into a battle of who's going to release what to what, if that's the case. Because this is a town-wide, you need town support to build a new high school, so I would hope you have support for the townspeople to say, this is what we're going to do with that piece of property, because I would imagine the residents around there would love to know. I'm sure you hear it on your evening walks.
I'm a resident around there. That's
would love to know what the heck would be going in there if you're going to vote to remove it.
That's right. And you're right, Paul. I think that, that's part of what I'll call the gap in long-range planning, in long-range facilities planning. Even, for example, I'll go back to one of your comments about, so Greenwood Center now we're finishing up the renovations as we speak for the town government to move in there. There's a significant discussion about 2 months or 3 months ago about, how much we finish up, renovate that building. Do we renovate it enough to be a permanent town hall, or do we just do enough to kind of move in temporarily? And there was a lot of discussion, and talk about the Permanent Building Committee. They weighed in and said, in the town of Longmeadow, our town hall should be in the middle of town. It should be about where the current town hall is. Well, the current town hall is A, too small, B, is not handicap accessible, C, is in pretty tough shape if you go in the basement or other areas in terms of its age. It just needs to be renovated. And in fact, the community house is pretty much the same. People may not know, we had a number of offices in the basement of the community house because we just couldn't put them anywhere, and the community house is in tough shape. So the commitment was we should do something with the buildings in the middle of town. So we are now just now beginning through the town manager's efforts to look at what do we do with those buildings in the middle of town. Frankly, something's got to be done to significantly renovate those buildings before you could consider moving town offices back into the center of town. And I won't even get into what it might cost and what you might do. I mean, you need to put in elevators, so do you put in a link between the community house and town hall? Do you fill that gap in with the elevator in there? Do you put the elevator in the community house? Do you put the elevator in town? How do you do all this kind of stuff, and what's it going to cost? And whatever it is, whatever you think it's going to cost, double it or more, because it's going to be expensive. But even when we do that, if we do that, then what do we do with Greenwood Center, right? So you're right. It's the long-range planning for facilities. What should we do with it? And frankly, there's a lot of people in town who, and I fall into this at times, are very nostalgic for what Longmeadow has been or what it had been years ago. And I'll use as the example what we call the Old Town Hall, which is then the American Legion Hall, and then Park and Rec took it over, and there were dance classes in there. I don't know if anybody's been in there recently, but I have. You're afraid to go through the floor. I mean, frankly, that building's not good, not safe to be in, not good for very much. And if the town was smart, they'd sell the land, and somebody who would take it will probably demolish it. I mean, it's that bad a property. But yet we have people who say, no, we ought to fix it. I mean, fixing that building up is going to cost us millions and millions of dollars, and we have no potential use for it. And I think the same thing may come down to Greenwood Center eventually. I mean, you've got to decide what are you going to do with the building so you know how to best fix it up. And is the answer fix it up and make it good enough for a permanent town hall, and we'll do something else with the buildings in the middle of the town? I don't know the answer to that, but you're right. We need to take I was going to use the word comprehensive, but really it's a building by building look at what we do.
Okay. And just for folks, the old town hall is the building that's located across from CVS and where Fletcher's is in that plaza. There's a little brick building. If you've never noticed it before, that's the old town hall. And it's a cute little building. It should be in Storyton and West Springfield, for example, that kind of building, like they move them over there.
Right.
But my only point with this is that there's nothing wrong with improving buildings. There's nothing wrong with expanding buildings. There's nothing wrong with making sure that we're delivering the services to the people. But if we are going to spend tens of thousands of dollars to renovate Greenwood Center, which is fine, and we're going to move there temporarily, that tells me that the long-range plan is to get the people back into the center of town. So, all right, if that's the case, then what is that cost? We should have thought about that before we started renovating. And I'm talking about from the town manager perspective of what should be presented to the town. We're going to spend this money here to spend this money here. It's going to take X number of years, but this is a plan. And if not, and I don't have a problem with town offices being up at Greenwood or whatever. I think that was a recommendation I made years ago, but that's another story. But to get people to spend that kind of money, that Old Town Hall is a great example. It is a cute little building when you went on the inside. I've been to meetings there. I know they used to have dance classes in there. Civic organizations used it for meetings, but that's all it was for. There was no purposeful use of that building for the town. I think we booked things in there just to be able to use it and keep the heat on it in the wintertime and so forth.
But at this point, you can't safely put people in that Old Town Hall. Let me go back, Paul, to the Greenwood Center discussion. So the town manager came to the select board with a proposal to use ARPA money that was available, otherwise unspent ARPA money, to do some modest renovations to Greenwood Center. Put up some temporary walls, put up some, get some flooring down, that kind of thing. But we weren't going to redo the HVAC system, not necessarily redo the electrical system, and it had relatively been done. And the discussion by the select board was, and I will say that to some degree I led this discussion, was, if you're going to do it, let's do it right. Not just do it for the $100,000 or $150,000 that you've got the ARPA money for, but let's spend some real money on it and fix it up and make it the town hall. And that was actually approved by the select board, that plan, when some folks in town came back and convinced members of the select board that no, don't do that. Just do the quick renovations, kind of patchwork to Greenwood, just enough to move in there temporarily, and let's make long-range plans to move back. That decision was then made that we're moving to Greenwood temporarily. We will consolidate in Greenwood temporarily with a plan that says, but now we got to find out what it really will cost to move back. And frankly, I have no clue what that cost is. I know it's more than $10 million, but I don't know if it's $50 million. I don't know what it's going to be because I don't know what the design is. The question is, do the residents of the town have the initiative to approve that spending after they're going to be asked to put in a new high school on top of a adult center, on top of a DPW, a middle school on top of an adult center, DPW, and we're still paying for the old high school. I mean, we've got bonding in there that's pretty extensive. So the concern you have is, what if this decision to renovate the town hall doesn't get approved? One thing we found out with the DPW discussion was that schools have a natural constituency. People have children, people had children, people know that the education is our product in our town and support that. The DPW didn't have a natural constituency to say, let's build a new DPW building. The one down on Pondside Road was kind of out of sight, out of mind. And those of us who'd been down there knew it was a mess from 1938. You know, you can literally put your pen through the walls. And, you know, the question is there a constituency to spend money on a town hall? Is there a constituency to spend money on other things? And at some point, what's too much money? You know, at what, you know, you can do it through Proposition 2.5 exemptions, overrides, so we don't have to worry about the tax cap if we do it right, but it's still taxable money. It's still money. Yeah. And so at what point are people going to say, look, I'm paying $350 a year extra on my taxes for the high school. I'm paying, you know, $75 a year extra on my taxes for the DPW. I'm paying $60-something a year extra on my taxes for the adult center. You know, and I'm probably going to be paying $500 or $600 a year extra in taxes. The number's to be worked out, so I don't know. On the middle school, how much more am I going to pay for the, you know, town offices? And it's going to be a question, and it's going to be a challenge. So the problem I have is, there's no guarantee we're going to go that way, but on the other hand, without a plan, you know you're not going to go that way. So,
yeah, well, and that's my point. I mean, we're still utilizing parts of the old DPW that we were, you know.
Well, they finally moved out the last couple of weeks.
All of it.
All of it.
Okay.
In fact, there's a RFP to tear it down.
Okay. So prior to that, we were still using parts of it.
We're using parts of it for storage, not for operations, but for storage.
Right. So, and that's been what, 2 years now they've been in DPW, right? And so and that's my point with this, is that if we're going to ask voters to vote for a new middle school, which seems like it's the right thing to do, we need to be able to say this is what's going to happen with this, which is Greenwood, and maybe even the water tower property, because I think way back we blew it when we redid this high school, that we should have put town offices here where the superintendent's offices are, but that's water long gone under the bridge, because the facilities in the center of town are not adequate for the staffing that we have to run. I don't know why we ever put people in the basement of the community house. And there's nothing wrong with keeping the buildings as they are. I understand the historical perspective, and to me, the community house is part of that fiber of the center of town. But it doesn't mean they have to be town-owned. They can be privately owned. I mean, we need to start thinking about out of the box a little bit about that too. I mean, I know we run dance classes up there and things like that, but there's also, we also have Greenwood Center now and all these other places, right? And that's Mark, my biggest beef is that the plan is it always seems, and I'm not saying it is, but it always seems like is a reactionary as opposed to proactive. You've been around long enough to remember the long-range plan.
Right.
The biggest thing that he said is put lines here in the center of town, right? The long-range plan was we need to develop the water tower property. I think the long-range plan is over 20 years old.
There's actually been at least one new one, maybe two new ones.
But I'm saying the original long-range plan, which was cited by everybody over the years of what we were spending, was over 20 years ago, saying we need to do something with the water tower property, right? And we're still here talking about it. So one of the projects that I heard talked about, and I don't know if it's gone through, was to take a look at town Wi-Fi.
Yeah.
What's the status of that?
So actually, at the September 3rd Select Board meeting, there was a report from I think it's now called the Town Fiber Optics Committee.
Oh, good.
And they have actually made a recommendation, which, you know, I think is a very good one, and it is to engage a company called brand is Fiber Springs. It's actually South Hadley Electric Light Company working with the Holyoke Light and Power Company, and they brand it under something called Fiber Springs to build fiber optics through the town of Longmeadow. Okay? They did a preliminary presentation, and it's a preliminary presentation based on their history in 8 or 10 different communities around Western Massachusetts, and it looks as if it's probably a viable plan for the town. They use a term called fiberhoods, which is kind of a take on neighborhoods, because they're smart enough to understand that you can't fund and build out the entire town at once. For people who don't know, we get this a lot. You know, why don't we have competition for Comcast? Comcast owns the wires in town. You know, anybody who puts in a new system has to put in wires in town. We have, in fact, 91 miles of residential roads that require wiring in town. That's a pretty expensive operation. The estimate is somewhere in the $20 to $30 million range to do that, just for the construction, not even the cost of the fiber. So, what Fiber Shield is proposing is they do these surveys, and if they find 40 or 50 people in a neighborhood, that want this, they'll build it out, pay for that area, and do it. They propose a monthly price of about $70 for high-speed internet. And when they say high-speed internet, it's 3 or 4 times the speed of Comcast. I mean, it's very high-speed internet. The town would own the process, would own this system, and we would contract with somebody like Sheld or Holyoke Power, Light, or Fiber Spring, who would then operate it, so that if there was a problem, a tree fell on a wire, they'd come out and fix it. If a homeowner had a problem, they have an 800 number to call that sends somebody to fix it. So the issue is, how do you get started? The old joke of the way to eat an elephant is one bite at a time. And the way to put fiber optics into a town is one fiber hood at a time. Even by their optimistic planning, they're saying 4 to 5 years to build out the town. And I think that makes sense. My concern, and I expressed this at this meeting, is cash flow. Because you got to put up money up front. And so this organization needs to borrow money. If it's owned by the town needs to borrow money. But we really can't afford to increase people's taxes again or have additional borrowing on the town's books. And so what we're trying to do is borrow enough that it gets paid off as we expand this out and borrow as we go. The problem is, in town, wherever you see phone poles, light poles, electric light poles, whatever you call them, the poles that have the wires on them, those are either owned by Verizon or Eversource in our town, and they each own about half. To get on those poles, you have to pay for it, and you have to submit a pole permit request. And so there's some upfront money that needs to be done, and we're likely to go to the fall town meeting and ask for some of that upfront money. It may be as much as $400,000, and that's just for the pole permits. But once we do that, my hope and I hope my guidance will be that we need this process to pay for itself as it goes. So as we do a little bit, which will upfront some money, the income from that will pay for us to do a little bit more and a little bit more and a little bit more. The issue is going to be, how about my neighborhood or your neighborhood? And everybody's going to say, how do you pick the neighborhood? And they're going to pick the neighborhoods by whichever group can bring us the greatest income for the quickest advancement. So, the last thing I'll say about this, Paul, is I hope we're going to this with our eyes open. The organization that's doing this, the Sheld company, is telling us that the take rate, the number of people who take it, has been right around 50%. And that's probably a fair number. I don't know if it's 40 or 60 or something like that. I know there are a lot of people who I've talked to, they say, I have Comcast, I bundle, it's good enough. I don't need to, if I drop the cable, my other costs don't go down. I'm going to stick with Comcast. We have people who don't have cable at all because they just don't want it. And so, but then there are people who realize that, especially as we go on in time, that, gee, I can get this high-speed fiber system that's fiber into your house. It's not fiber along the roads, it's fiber into your house. And I can go to streaming services and cut the Comcast cable altogether and buy 2 or 3 streaming services. So, they see that over a 5-year period, the take rate goes to about 50%. So the economics are, the break-even's like 44%. So 50%, it would provide a little bit of revenue for the town. Above 50%, a little bit more. If we're only at 35%, potentially a problem. But
so is that project even worth? Without knowing, because no one knows, right? You know what I mean. You can't say how many people. We can guess, and I don't have. We just talked about that. I don't have cable and so forth. But I understand what they estimate.
Right.
Right. But is it a project like that worth going to the tax base and say, or taxpayers and say, look, we need you to front money because we're going to take a shot at this? And it's a shot. I mean, it might be a very logical shot or thought out.
So let me give you the arguments
Yep.
for and against that, because that was discussed. The argument against it is there's a number of people in town who don't use cable, won't use the high-speed fiber. Why should they, as town residents, be paying part of the money? Okay, that's a leading argument against why use town money. And I'd like to see this personally set up almost as an enterprise fund or an independent organization, so that revenue does whatever it pays for the operation. The flip side of this is if we get above 44% take rate, then what we're going to do is actually have excess money that spins off to the town. And if that's the case, then the flip side argument is, well, the whole town potentially can benefit from this, and the town needs to invest, so the town ought to invest this upfront money, because down the road, and it may be 4 or 5 years, there'll be revenue back to the town. Now again, neither one of us know what the answer is going to be, but to some degree you have to say, am I optimistic or pessimistic? I will add to this, my own feeling is that, fiber optics in 10 or 15 years is going to be like telephone was 10 years ago, and water and sewer are. It's really an essential of living in the 21st century in New England. And so, you can do one of two things. You can buy it forever from Comcast, or you can use this opportunity to have the town own it and potentially bring revenue to the town. So, I believe there's likely to be some difficult span between now and when it becomes the right thing to do. But I think hopefully somebody looking back 25 years from now, when I won't be here, will say it was a great move and the town's generating, not a ton of money, but enough money to make it worthwhile. And oh, by the way, the service the people in town are getting makes the process worthwhile. But that's the best answer I can give you, Paul.
Okay. One last thing. I received my water bill. All right? I'm not complaining about my water bill. But what I noticed was if I was going to mail my water bill back in, it goes someplace in Norfolk.
Reading,
Mass. There we go,
right.
Reading, Mass. Why?
We found out that a lockbox is a much better process than town hall. We don't have to have somebody run into the bank every day. We don't have to worry about people opening up envelopes. It's a far more secure, far more precise accounting system. Your electric bill goes to somewhere, even though it's Eversource, goes to Pennsylvania. Your phone bill probably goes to New Jersey, something like that. There is a whole bunch of these organizations. They make their living opening envelopes, scanning checks and depositing them. It's really, really worth it. I won't get into some of the issues the town's had, but we had people dedicate, between quarterly tax bills and then quarterly water bills and all the other, we had people in town just constantly spending their time opening up envelopes and depositing checks and running to the bank, and it just wasn't an efficient use of the people in town. And when I first looked at it, I said, is this something we really want to do? But now that we see what the benefits are, it's really paid off.
Okay. All right. Well, I think we've kind of hit our time limit.
Okay.
Because I got the signal, not a good one. Either that or they give me some kind of hand signs. I don't know what they. No. And I'm hopefully going to have Mark back. Part of this, folks, is the reason why I'm doing this. I think everybody needs to hear what's going on. Select board meetings. God bless everybody for being on the board, but they're probably not the most entertaining things to listen to. No offense. I think you had a dog bite.
We've had
something like that.
4 dog hearings recently.
Dog hearings are very fun because you get all kinds of testimony in those, baby. If you really want to hear passionate people, go to a dog bite hearing. But I want to thank you for coming on and answering some questions, and hopefully we'll do more shows just to make sure everybody knows what's going on as we're going to have these projects come forward, because I think it's important because we have a lot of money that's on the table.
Absolutely.
And again, thank you for coming, Mark. Guys, thank you. Have a great day, and we'll talk to you soon. Thank you.